You're listening to a podcast by the Center for Action and Contemplation. To learn more, visit cac.org.
Greetings. I'm Jim Finley.
And I'm Kirsten Oates.
Welcome to Turning to the Mystics.
Welcome, everyone, to Season 12 of Turning to the Mystics, where we've been turning to Brother Lawrence and practice of the presence. And I'm here with Jim to respond to the questions that have come in this season. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Yeah. This is the 12th season, and there were 12 disciples, so we're on a roll.
We're on a roll. Wonderful. And I want to start by just saying thank you to everyone who made the effort to send in a question. The questions really help the season really make sure we're tracking with people and that we're being responsive to what's not clear and what insights people are getting. And Jim, this season, the questions yet again were just wonderful.
Yeah, they were.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to answer them all, but we do read them all. And we're very grateful for them. So thank you again. And with that, we're ready to get started, Jim?
Yes.
Wonderful. So the first question is from Andrea. And she says, I've heard elsewhere that Brother Lawrence was too bothered by his sins to be able to maintain himself as a hermit. In your telling, he was too troubled by PTSD. I can see that sin and trauma are both forms of separation from connectedness. So I see the connection between sin and PTSD, but the tone feels so different in the two renderings. Can you speak to this?
Let's say that in a broad sense, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a psychological symptom that separates us from the ability to rest quietly in the goodness of our own life. It exiles us because we're still caught up in the trauma, either because it's still going on, or it's become internalized and it gets triggered in all kinds of ways. And so the whole healing process is how to be healed from its hold on us so we can step back in to the truth of ourself and the goodness of ourself as a healing process. So there's that. Sin, insofar as sin means deliberate acts of doing things that are harmful or causes suffering to ourselves or others, and we do them out of certain hardness of heart. We do them anyway. It separates us from the truth of who we are as God's beloved. Through an act of repentance and through an act of conversion and through an act of discipleship, we're healed of that. And that's the good news. I mean, that's the thing. There's also another sense of sin, which is relevant. That is, in a broad sense, the fallen state is that we're separated from the ability to experientially abide in God's self-donating presence in our life day by day. In that exiled state, we act out the things that we do and we get caught up in the fears. And so both sin and trauma. And the issue is, where do those two touch each other? I used to give a series of retreats every year to people trained to be spiritual directors and see, where does clinical depression and the dark night of the soul touch each other? It's a complex thing. As a clinical psychologist who worked with trauma, with people who wanted spirituality to be a resource in their trauma, I've thought a lot about the interface of that. I think that's what you're touching on. It's a significant thing, really. Yes.
That's so helpful, Jim. Those definitions are really, really helpful. And I think part of this question is that in older versions of Brother Lawrence's work, they use the word sin to describe the trauma that he faced. And then Carmen defined the sin more in modern day terms as PTSD. So just wondering what you'd say about that in terms of his desire to be a hermit.
One, he could have meant sin as a sense of his own sinfulness. He could have meant that, an ongoing conversion process. But also PTSD because of that he was at war and the things that he saw. And also he was grievously wounded with a wound in his leg. He had it all of his life. And so that combination of the things that he saw that he got internalized and the wound that he suffered, I think both were there. I used to work in a hospital with Vietnam vets who were at an alcohol treatment center. And so they had dual diagnosis. They had alcoholism and PTSD, but they were in a 12-step program of how to hand their life over to their higher power. And so you see it all kinds of ways, these these dimensions of ourself touch each other.
As a follow-on question for that, Jim, there's a question from Seth who says that they've been diagnosed with anxiety, ADHD, and CPTSD, among other things. Sitting or cooking or doing anything seems to have my mind racing from one thing to the next without fail. How do I practice God's presence with any consistency when my monkey mind has such feral primates?
This is another example where the psychological and the spiritual touch each other. By the way, CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a lovely book by Judith Herman called Trauma and Recovery. And she speaks of complex post-traumatic stress disorder it goes in the direction of somaticizing, as in eating disorders. It goes in the direction of personality disorders, such as borderline and these patterns, or it goes in the direction of dissociating. But also related to it is it triggers mood disorders of either anxiety or depression. And I have to say, not just as a psychologist who worked with it, but I myself was diagnosed with CPTSD, so I know it well, very familiar with it. The racing mind is more in the category of a kind of obsessive compulsive disorder and also anxiety, like the racing mind. So I have some thoughts on it. One is sometimes to just sit in contemplative prayer, it's too boundaryless and the mind races. And so one approach is to stay with more focused forms of prayer, Lectio Divina, meditation on the scriptures, or just listening to the podcast as a stream of words and series of insights. And that can help the mind stay more focused because there's something to hold on to. The other approach with the racing mind that's helped me to try to follow your racing mind. So you could say to your racing mind, just where do you think you're going? See, in other words, are you chasing something? Are you running from something? Are you both? And this idea of watching your racing mind means that there's a dimension of you that transcends the racing mind where you wouldn't be able to watch it. The very fact you can watch it must mean there's a place of observation that relativizes the racing mind. And there's another part of all of this. If the racing mind can see that it's seen, and it's very good to do this because God's following your racing mind, and God's infinitely in love with you in the midst of your racing mind. So sometimes we can take things like this that are a significant challenge and turn them into a state of transformation, like a grace over time.
Well, Seth, I really appreciate you being willing to share those things that you're struggling with. And Jim, also that you're willing to share your own personal experience with those. So we hope that's helpful, Seth. Let us know.
Yeah, I'd like to add one more thing. It isn't as if we could say that I hope it helps. So Seth is going, wow, that really helps. I think it took care of it. It helps. So if you just stay with it patiently, 3 years later, we're in the midst of a process, and it's a graced process. And the longer we stay with it, we learn things along the way. I think it's important to keep that perspective in mind.
Okay, next question. I'm a long-time meditator and practicer of centering prayer. I am also a long-time sufferer of Parkinson's disease. I'm finding as the illness progresses, involuntary movements associated with the condition are making the initial directive of meditation, to be still, increasingly difficult and at times impossible. I persevere, but feel the rug has been pulled out from under me. I find consolation in the pots and pans of daily existence and the prayers of my childhood. For this reason, Brother Lawrence has been an especially profound inspiration to me. I feel there must be others like me amongst your listeners, so would sincerely welcome your comments.
This is my sense with Parkinson's. See, be still and know that I am God. Another paraphrase in the Psalms also is, ponder on your bed and be still. So it is true that typically speaking, the stillness is literally stillness, like we sit still, like we're sitting still. But to realize the physical act of sitting still all by itself is not union with God. The fact you're sitting real still doesn't mean you're deepening your experience of God's oneness with you. Therefore, I would suggest this, that you would consider this, that your deep acceptance of your inability to sit still is the stillness of God's oneness with you. And I think that's a mysterious, intimate path to take. And also, like you suggested in your question, you're not alone with this. There are other people with Parkinson's all over the world, and you're woven into each other, that you're Suffering from Parkinson's doesn't belong to you. We're all woven into each other in our suffering because we're all woven together into God who's infinitely in love with us in our suffering. You can reflect on that and see if that approach is helpful.
The next question is from Saskia, and she writes, "With God, all things are possible. I love that Bible verse, even though I don't know what it means. In any case, it doesn't mean that everything is possible the way I want it to be. It's deeper and more mysterious. It breaks something open within me, and I increasingly realize how limited my perspective is on my own life and on the world. I love the first maxim of Brother Lawrence, and of course I was curious what you would say about all things are possible. I found out that you expand on belief and hope and love, but leave the first words for what they are. It makes me wonder because this open space seems so fitting to me. On the other hand, I'm longing to hear something from you about all things are possible."
Yes, that's very good. It's an example where something might not be true psychologically, but it's true spiritually. For example, I'm 82 years old and I love God. So the people are practicing for the marathon here. They run past the house. So I could say, because I love God, I think I'll go out for the marathon. I might win. Is it possible? I love God. It says all things are possible. I could win. It's not going to happen. So it doesn't mean that. It means something deeper, and it means this. Since we're called by the infinite love to an infinite union with infinite love, and we sense that we're drawn to that, but we, by our own finite powers, are not empowered in our finite abilities to attain an infinite union with infinite love. And so with us, it's not possible. But with God, all things are possible. In our finite inability to attain the infinite attains itself and overtakes us and takes us to itself in our inabilities. It means that all things are possible at the level of salvation. And there's another level of this about salvation. St. Paul, the thorn in the flesh, and our wobbling ways. See, is it ever possible that I'm going to get strong enough spiritually to be past my half-heartedness? Whatever your litany of frailties are, I have mine, you have yours, that I'll finally be holy enough to be one with God. It goes deeper than that all things are possible. In that experiential salvation, you can intimately realize by the grace of God, God is already infinitely in love with you in the very midst of your inabilities, which is the gift of tears and which is salvation. And I think that's an understanding of all things are possible.
Lovely. I love hearing that. I'm just going to quickly read that opening sentence from the first maxim. And the name of that maxim is "Everything is possible." Everything is possible for those who believe, even more for those who hope, still more for those who love, and most of all for those who practice and persevere in these three powerful paths.
That's right. So what's the very first one? Let's just take the first one. He said, all things are possible for those who
believe.
See, what's that mean? All things are possible. It's a great idea. By gosh, I want to go believe. How do I go believe? There are kind of aspects of a willingness to let ourselves be receptively open to God being infinitely in love with us. And I believe it, not in the sense that I comprehend it, but in my heart, even though I can't comprehend it, in my heart, I know that it's true. And I live by that. And so I think that's the tonal quality of it.
Great question. Thank you, Saskia. Okay, next question is from Tom. I'm confused about the use of the word presence and the phrase the presence. I often practice being present in the moment, and I appreciate that while in the state of being fully present, the quality of the mind and heart is one of presence, but it often sounds to me like Brother Lawrence is talking about something distinct from this, what he calls the presence. This makes it sound like there is my body, mind, heart, soul, and then there is a presence with a capital P, which I desire to know and to be in union with. If I am in the state of being fully present and the quality of my mind and heart is one of total presence and openness, then the presence seems to be a concept and a bit dualistic. Is it sufficient to make my practice very simply to be fully present in the moment? And then would I actually be the presence Brother Lawrence is talking about? Thank you for the wonderful teachings and guidance.
Another question with the distinction between the psychological and the spiritual and how they touch each other. See, first of all, presence can refer to myself in my own capacity to be present. So if I'm engaged, if I'm attentive, I'm there, I'm present. And so we vary a lot to the extent that we're present to anybody. We also vary the extent to which we're present to ourselves. These kind of layerings of heightened degree of presence. And so when we sit with God, we're trying to be as present as possible to the presence of God, this way through prayer and mindfulness, to practice the practice. And what we're really doing, like when he saw the tree and he was in the presence of God, we're trying to assume a stance that offers the least resistance to being overtaken by what graced our heart in our awakening moments. It's like a receptive stance of presence. But it goes even deeper about presence, and he's referring to it here. The infinite presence of God in an ongoing self-donating act is presencing itself. That is, it's pouring itself out and totally giving itself away in and as the intimate miracle of the gift of our very presence and our nothingness without God. So we're subsisting in a transsubjective relationship, like light subsists in flame, and that's the presence. So Thomas Merton says, when Jesus says I and I say I, it's the same I in the order of grace and love. And that's what we're moving towards, a communal presence in which we and God mutually disappear as dualistically other than each other, in an intimate realization in the sincerity of our heart. And so there was a moment we were awakened by it in different ways. But the path that we're on to practice the presence is to be as faithfully receptive as possible to being ever more habitually stabilized in that presence that alone is ultimately real.
I think we discussed this maybe just in a slight way somewhere in the podcast about the difference between mindfulness and this practice, that it's not just being mindful. Yeah, it's that opening to God like you were just expressing.
But it applies also, by the way, in Buddhism, in mindfulness, and also in yoga. It has the same, it implies mindfulness and being as mindful as possible. But the mindfulness is opening oneself up to a communal mindfulness of a communal oneness. I want to say something too, I should say it. I think we're moving together in the communal sincerity. The mystics this is what they do for us. They help us to be concerned about such things. We have to realize we're not honoring the depth. It's like we're skimming over a depth. The next question, please. Like, check that one off. Anything else you want me to answer? And so, but we're just respecting that. But if I say something that sheds a little bit more light on the journey you're obviously on, or you wouldn't be able to ask questions like this, then we're on the path together.
Yes, and you can hear the depth of the beauty of every question that we've received. Yeah.
Yeah, they're so sincere. This is the path.
Then for all of us, it's hard to put it into words. And so the fact that they've even been able to write these amazing questions is.
And there's another thing I think we're saying too. We're putting words in which we're speaking in such a way that what we're speaking of is beyond what words can adequately say. So it is a logos, it is a word, but it's like words of love, the words of poets, or the healing word. It's not a word that defines or explains, but it's a word that carries the energy of what is beyond what words can say. And we recognize it in each other when we hear it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. You can certainly recognize it in these questions. So Adele asks, can you talk about the role of seeing and remembering as part of our practice of the presence? I'm thinking particularly about in How to Practice, where Brother Lawrence writes, that is why the heart is where we must take care to produce the little inner look to God. I'm wondering about Brother Lawrence's experience of the tree and the intersection of memory and the inner look. I had a sort of quickening as a youngster and find remembering it is more like being there, and it sort of instantly situates me in the joyful awareness and experience of God's radiant and extravagant love for me.
Let's say, first of all, in this sense, by seeing we meant realizing, that we meant that we realize it. So there are certain moments where we unexpectedly realize this oneness that we can't explain, like the taste. And also, we can then look back and remember the moments. There are also moments that we can't remember. in all the years of talking with people in spiritual direction, we can't remember a certain moment in which the door opened, but rather there was a certain point that we could tell some qualitative shift has happened inside of us. But we can't mark it back to a certain moment. The seeing then is this interior realizing. There is remembering or not remembering these moments where we momentarily experience it. And we would also hope that listening to the podcast itself evokes such moments, that the moments of sitting with the podcast in devotional sincerity, the deathless presence of Brother Lawrence, touches us with more moments of this, and we can remember it. And then the remember it then evokes within us, I wonder about this, I wonder about that. And that's what these questions are. And so we're seeing and remembering, but we're seeing and remembering it right now in the present. And that's why if we're reading the mystics or we're reading the Gospels or you're listening to the podcast, and as you're listening, the words that you're listening to is evoking the very experience the words are about. That's what makes that moment of listening memorable, like it's happening now. So it's always carrying into the present, the memorable nature of the present moment of ongoing wakefulness. And also, even when we don't remember because the cell phone just went off, that memorable death is always there, like ribbon through the ordinariness of things. And there's a certain way of just knowing in our heart that it's true.
Do you think, Jim, when Brother Lawrence reflected on the tree, like this listener was talking about, that the memory went beyond just picturing something in time, but went into the depth of the experience itself?
I think what happens with some people is there's the accumulative effect of hundreds of little glimpses, and it puts us on the path. But what happens with some people, there are awakening events in the aftermath of which we're never quite the same. And sometimes they can come when we're quite young. We'll never forget them. And the light that shines out in those moments illumines the path that we're seeking to follow. So I think when Brother Lawrence, and he says that, the priest says that he was going to him for spiritual direction. Brother Lawrence says through all the years he's been practicing, there's never been a moment where it has been as profoundly divine as that moment. So sometimes we're quickened with this moment. And Brother Lawrence had one of those experiences. Sometimes people have those experiences. A number of people have those, I think. Yeah.
But it's certainly not necessary to be on the path, is what you're saying too. Mm-hmm.
Nothing's necessary that hasn't been given. Then it's not necessary. And by the way, Thomas Merton once said, we mentioned this in an earlier talk too, he said, sometimes we think we're waiting to get zapped by God. And he said, that happened. You can get zapped by God. There is ecstasy and rapture. That does happen. And as if they have to prop you up in a corner and fan you, because you're a mystic. He said, but really it's the opposite. We're trying to calibrate our heart to an ever finer scale to pick up in something as subtle as a breath. See, because every time you take a breath, from whence does it arise? It's God. So there's a moment where there's this subtle, intimate unfolding of something so delicate. And that's why the moment when you try to explain it, you fall away from it. That's when you try to turn it so you can have it. It recedes further. But when you can just yield to it and let it have its way with you unexplainably, in the simplicity, it carries you along. And that's the path Brother Lawrence is inviting us to follow, I think, all the mystics.
Andy sent us a cartoon. Andy does little drawings and doodling while he's listening to the podcast, and sent us a really fun cartoon picture of Brother Lawrence and being present. And then it notes, I'm so bored. And he's noticed how you talked about boredom being part of the process. And I wonder if you touched on that a little bit again, Jim.
We're bored when we're not engaged in what's happening. We're bored. Then we're deeply engaged in what's happening. We're not bored. So what happens then, if we've been quickened by the divine, the finite consciousness of the finite dimensions of ourselves seem to be so profoundly inadequate to what we seek. Anything less than that fullness we find boring. It isn't good, better, best. It's infinitely better than the best. And therefore, even if it's the best, it's infinitely less than what I'm looking for. So boring can have that thing. There's another mystical dimension to this too. See, St. John of the Cross, he talks about it. We find our way to God in a passage through a dark night, which is a sense of interior powerlessness, in the loss of consolation, and so on and so on. And then he says, what we realize if we don't panic, the dark night where actually our finite eyes are being blinded by an infinite light. So in a way, strangely enough, the more intimately the infinity is giving itself to us as infinity, we're bored because our finite eyes can't see it. You know what I mean? Our finite feelings can't endure it. So it's almost like a self-metamorphosizing, mysterious thing of crossing over, and letting it take us to itself unexplainably and draw us into the depths of itself in our heart, which is the experience that the mystics are trying to help us be in touch with the ways that we have experienced that. But they're trying to help us put words to it. And what is the path to be more habitually stabilized in that?
And thank you to Andy for the cartoon. We all enjoyed it. Dorothy and you and I all enjoyed it.
It was funny. It was very good.
So thank you. Jim, that's reminding me the boredom of so many listeners when they write in, so many say that if they're having trouble sleeping or it's just part of their regular practice that they put the podcast on and listen to it as they go to sleep. So I'm wondering if the podcast is so boring, it puts them to sleep, or if it's
sometimes when you're drifting off to sleep, there's that hypnagogic state between the two worlds. That hypnagogic state between the two worlds is very subtle. And we stay there for a while, and then we disappear. So really, it's the realm where the interior realm of dreams, which opens out upon the interiority of God, and the realm of the exterior is a kind of a quietness, where it's a kind of a quiet, reflective state that goes beyond trying to figure anything out, and we rest in it unexplainably as a kind of a homecoming. I think that's a nice metaphor for deep meditative states when we're sitting this. We're paradoxically even more vividly awake, but we're more vividly awake and be more profoundly somatically grounded in a kind of a luminous bodily quietness, and we're resting in it unexplainably. So yeah, that's a subtle point that he's free. Yeah, I think that's true.
Well, and of course I was teasing you. I don't think you're boring.
Yeah, no. Some people find me quite boring. People who are already on the cusp of being drawn into this, when they hear of it, it speaks to them. Those who haven't been brought to the cusp of it, they walk right past it. And they walk right past it because it's not given to them to see it. Everyone's given something. And so it's a gift to be touched by this. And by the way, insofar as we're in the stream of this sensitivity, just like Brother Lawrence when he's writing to us, his deathless presence, there's also this kind of hypnagogic quality to the awareness of these talks. It's a poetic kind of flow that doesn't explain or define anything, but the rhythm and cadence of the voice carries us along so we can tell we're in the presence of it this way, and we rest. But there's no it to it. It's not an it. It's kind of an effulgence or a fullness that we learn to rest in and live by. It's a gift.
I like what you're saying too. I'd never thought about it that way, because I also listen to your voice on things like a long airplane flight when I'm on a 15-hour flight to Australia, or if I'm having trouble sleeping. It puts you perhaps in a deep meditative state, which is so soothing and, like you say, like a homecoming, even before it puts you to sleep. So there's that way it lulls you into that.
I think it's true. I think there's something about my voice that's conducive to it. You know what I mean? Because it's not sharp or edgy or defining. It hasn't. And so there's something about the tonal quality of the voice. It reminds me of being at the monastery with the monks chanting, like deepening the capacity to listen. Chanting has that same kind of, there's something about the quality of the rhythmic tonality of it that it invites or evokes this contemplative state.
Well, anyone who's listening and about to fall asleep, good night, sweet dreams.
Yes.
And
I used to give recorded talks somewhere. We used to have me say, we don't recommend that you listen to these talks while you're driving your car. You should pull over to the side to have your ecstasy. You know what I mean? So go
be
this,
lulled
anyway.
into your
Anyway,
deep meditative mind.
But by the way, but also notice at a subtle level, that subtly what we're talking about is at a more interior level, a heightened state of awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
At another dimension. It's true. Yeah.
Yeah, great point.
That's why I love that statement by Roysbrook, Nicholas of Cusa. He said it must be incomprehensibly understood. See, we understand it incomprehensibly, and it must be ineffably expressed. You express it ineffably, which is music or the voice of poets. This way, otherwise you're dropping off into definitions and conclusions, which has its own place.
So here's a question from Mark. My question on Brother Lawrence and practicing the presence relates to awe. For over a decade, I've been engaging in walking pilgrimage as a spiritual practice. Reading the academic literature and talking to others who've returned from pilgrimage, I noticed that awe, AWE, was a common experience. Diving further into awe, both in the Bible and modern scientific work, particularly the work by Deckard Keltner and colleagues, I hope I pronounced that correctly, reveals a diverse set of awe drivers. Examples extend beyond one's exposure to natural beauty or religious experience, but also to exposure to moral beauty, birth and death, experiences of collective effervescence, and superb creative works by musicians, artists, and poets. Scientists have noted that awe experiences are correlated with benefits, both to the individual and to others. Would it be reasonable to assume that such experiences of awe are quickenings prompted by presence?
Yes, it would be reasonable to assume that, because I think it's true. I'd like to comment on this too, about pilgrimage. Let's say a pilgrimage is a long journey to a sacred place. So you can go to pilgrimage to Assisi, where we were, to Rome or to Canterbury, wherever. The labyrinth is a pilgrimage. And the thing about the pilgrimage, and we might look on our own life as a pilgrimage, we're on a journey toward the infinite. And as we journey toward the infinite, awe is a state of being quietly overwhelmed with the kind of unexpected immensity of what we're finding our way into. And I also think it's almost like, I'll give an example. I'm looking at the ocean right now, and I love it in the wintertime when thick fog rolls in, and it's so thick you can't see the ocean. And several times on purpose, I've walked down to the sand, which is right there, and I can watch the fog bank rolling in, and I disappear in the fog bank. We can also have a state of awe in a quiet afternoon in an art museum. We can also have a state of awe in giving ourselves over to the smell of a blood-red rose. That awe is a state of wonderment, of being unexplainably one with the divinity of the immediacy of what we're with. And so I think what happens is we go on and we look at our own life, like how has it come to pass you become the man or woman who's even capable of being sensitive to such things? And is it not true? It evokes a certain sense of awe when you see the quiet unfoldings of your awakening, how unforeseeable. And God's not finished with us yet. There's more awe ahead. And these are previews of coming attractions, because when we die, it's eternal awe. It isn't like, you got this figured out. So it's almost like awe is our homeland, because awe is a state of experientially realizing incarnate infinity intimately realized. And also I think we can internalize awe, so we live in kind of a quiet inner awe state of the incomprehensible stature, standing up and sitting down, like a quiet. It doesn't necessarily spill over into emotional awe, but it's almost like an internalized state of the constancy of the awe dimensions of the divinity of life itself. And I think that's what Brother Lawrence is leading us towards. To all these mystics, everything that Jesus says was leading us to this.
That's lovely. It's another lens or way of describing that inner stance, Jim, that you often refer to.
Yes, it is. There's this nun, I might have mentioned this in a previous talk, but she was a Benedictine nun. And she was asked to submit an essay of a book on what are you convinced of? So this person asked politicians and billionaires, and they thought we might as well ask a cloistered nun, what are you convinced of? So we were talking about it. She said, well, the things I used to be convinced in, I'm no longer convinced in. And the things I used to be convinced in, that I'm still convinced in, I'm not convinced in the way that I used to be convinced. And I'm fairly certain this will continue. But then she said, this is the key. She said, but there's a light that burns in my heart, and I live by it. John of the Cross says, have no light to guide you except the one that burns in your heart. It's this kind of quietness that illumines everything unexplainably. That's why when we read the mystics, it isn't just we can tell they're talking about that, but the very fact we're touched by it bears witness that we already know it. They help us stabilize it.
Okay, that was a great question from Mark, who is an Australian and said a special g'day to me.
Yes.
Nice to hear from an Aussie.
Turning to the mystics will continue in a moment.
Registration is open for Being Presence, the Turning to the Mystics online retreat. Find inspiration with live teachings from James Finley. This December 4th through 7th, gather online in a contemplative community to journey deeper into the mystical wisdom of Gabriel Marcel and Brother Lawrence. A video replay will be available to all registrants as well. Learn more at cac.org/online retreat.
This is a question from Gary, and he writes, my question relates to the metaphor of the thimble, which has been so helpful to me as I catch myself striving to make mystical union happen by my own willpower. In describing the mystical invitation to surrender rather than strive, Jim often says, you cannot put the ocean into a thimble, but you can put a thimble in the ocean, and you are that thimble. I have called upon this image often as a way to help me let go and trust. However, in listening to this latest series on Brother Lawrence, in session 2, Jim said, each one of us is an utterly unique little bit of the infinity of the beloved, but the infinity of the beloved is infinitely given to you, whole and complete, boundless in all directions. It's not divvied out. It's boundless and utterly complete in the mystery of who you are and in your nothingness without God. So while we cannot put an ocean into the thimble that is us, in a sense, it would seem that this is exactly what God has done by infusing infinity within us. So my question is, how can I reconcile Jim's original metaphor with the sense that God has done exactly that, placing an infinite ocean within all of us? Is it simply recognizing the dualism in my thinking or accepting yet another paradox?
Let's say first is that we can't get the ocean into a thimble, and the ocean is the infinite presence of God. The thimble is our finite abilities to comprehend the infinite immense of God. So we can't get the immensity of God into the thimble of our finite understanding. It means that. But we can drop the thimble into the ocean, meaning the thimble is descending into the ocean. It's engulfed in and utterly immersed by what it cannot comprehend. And then say we are that thimble. But then it says, but if God gives to each of us, not just a little piece of God, but God gives to each of us the infinity of God as who we are, doesn't that mean then that that thimble that is who we are is itself oceanic? It does. See, if we look at it from the standpoint of the finite self, trying to comprehend the infinite, that's true. But what if there isn't, like when Brother Lawrence saw the tree in that moment, and it gets habitually stabilized. What if actually the oceanic immensity of God is given to who we unexplainably are in the thimble, but not in the thimble, but beyond it? Martin Heidegger puts it this way. He said, he's talking about transcendence. And he said, what if there's a moment of awakening, whatever it is? And what if you were to try to draw a circle around the immensity of your awakening? No matter how big you'd make the circumference of that circle, even if you'd make it infinitely big, if there's such a thing as an infinitely big circle, what you're experiencing would breach the circumference of that circle and would do so playfully and delightfully of what it delights to do. And so what it does, it's the dissolving away of distinctions in a kind of unexplainable, all-pervasive indistinction. I like to read this quote too. I just found it again. I might have mentioned it. Karl Rahner's book, Prayers for a Lifetime. There's a little opening sentence on the first page, one of the great theologians of the Second Vatican Council, Prayers for a Lifetime. It is both terrible and comforting to dwell in the inconceivable nearness of God and to be so loved by God himself that the first and the last gift is infinity and inconceivability itself. But we have no choice. God is with us. Pardon me, I don't speak English. Praise the Lord. I always put it back in the good old days when we were holy, everything seemed so clear. But now everything's become unexplainably wonderful.
Now I'm experiencing that state of awe that we were speaking about. You too.
Yeah.
Amazing. This one comes from Bev. When I hear and read that Brother Lawrence struggled with distractions, I am reassured that my own constant and seemingly endless struggle with distractions while meditating are not an issue. Is it possible that the Holy One loves my distractions, Letting go of judging and scolding myself for distraction has been a gradual grace, and I still fret that I'm not trying hard enough to stay present to the presence of the love that surrounds me.
Let's say that this is a delicate thing. Let's say there is distractions. And let's say we do our sincere best not to be carried away by the distractions. Then we might say, especially if we've been meditating for quite a while, I wonder if I'm ever going to get to a place where I get beyond this. Is the fruitfulness of my practice to be measured by the extent to which I'm able to get beyond it? Or is it that I'm to realize that God's infinitely in love with me in my deep acceptance of my inability to get beyond it, even as I keep sincerely trying to get beyond it? And that's closer. That's experiential self-knowledge, that there is the limit. And there's a tendency to identify myself with the limit, so I keep trying to get beyond the limit. And we should do our best to get beyond things that hinder and limit. But at another deeper level, how can I realize that the limitless love of God is limitlessly giving the infinity of itself to me in the midst of the acceptance of my limitations, which is humility. Yeah.
It's almost like being a thimble dropped into the ocean.
It's almost like that. Because the ego always does that. It keeps thinking, am I holy enough yet? Am I holy enough yet? So you think I'll finally reach the goal before the buzzer goes off? But what if there's no goal? What if that very idea is just salvation? You're overtaken by what's unexplainably there in the very midst of your wayward ways, which is the gift of tears and salvation.
Lovely. And I really appreciate that question because I think so many of us have that struggle. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Really appreciate it. This one comes from Bonnie, and she writes, in Dialogue 3 of Brother Lawrence, Jim talked about the fragility of aging. Jim, would you spend time elaborating on what that means and how we are to incorporate fragility into our spiritual journey as we cope with illness and or aging?
Yes. Now that I'm 82 years old, I'll share my experience.
Yes.
You know, if we think of our physical powers, our emotional powers, our capabilities, if we look on life like the first half and the second half of life, there is a kind of an ascending increase of powers and resources and capabilities and goals. And well, we should in our career, our relationship. I mean, we should do that. And then it hovers for a while at the crest of the wave. And it's very nice because you still have efficacy. You're still in your powers, but you've been around enough to have internalized skills to help people. It's a nice, fruitful time. Fruitfulness continues, but you head down the other side of the slope. One person said, you realize your wagon isn't hitched to the stars, it's hitched to a hole in the ground. When I was in the monastery, they remodeled the place. In the 1800s, they had these, you're supposed to practice modesty of the eyes, like looking down this way. So right where the wall touches the ceiling, they'd put these little sayings. So when you looked up, you get zapped by one of these sayings. and one saying was, today glistening eyes, tomorrow empty sockets. And praise the Lord. But the thing is, it'd be funny if it wasn't true.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. I'm fragile. Like I can't drive anymore. I'm kind of housebound. My daughters call me every day. I write 8 hours a day. My interior mind is as transparent as ever. But the fragility of myself, I use a cane, I fall over, my neuropathy this way, and blood pressure. And I'm unraveling. I'm literally watching myself unravel. And very, very soon I won't be here anymore. But you got to understand, from the day you're born, your death was already in the mail. It isn't like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Oh, really? Because everyone that's born dies. So everything that begins in time ends in time. But here's the key. Just as the fragility increases, this is the wisdom of the elders. One would hope the years would bring a kind of heightened luminosity, that in the midst of your dying, the ever more luminous awareness of the eternality of yourself that never dies, that we're all eternal. How can I discover within myself the eternality of God that never passes away, that's unexplainably ribboned to everything that's endlessly passing away? And that's kind of a mystical sensitivity, I think. And another example that I use is death itself, the stages of dying. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says, denial, anger, bargaining, and so on. And that's the ego aware that it's coming to the end of itself. But Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says some people come to acceptance. She said acceptance is you look into the face of a dying loved one. This is my phrasing of it. You look into the face of the dying loved one, and it's the gate of heaven. You realize you're looking at the eternality of the beloved, in the passing away of the beloved, and for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. How can I find the eternality of myself that transcends time in the midst of time? And that's the spiritual life.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I put it that way. Right?
It reminds me of what you said to an answer of another question about everything is possible. It doesn't mean that you won't age and you won't get frail and you might not, you might break bones, you might have a rough time of it. It means something deeper, that there's something trustworthy.
That's right. 100 years from now, you and I and everyone listening to this will all be dead. 10,000 years from now, we'll have been dead for 10,000 years. So I hope this is clear. You got to write it. You might want to write this down about the mystics. So what is it? It's fleeting, but the fleetingness is in the manifestation. But that which is manifested is eternal. The fleetingness is in time. It begins in time, it ends in time. But it's the fleetingness of a light that's eternal. And the key is, how can I discover that and live by it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you for that question, Bonnie. That's one of the funniest things I've ever heard you say about the wagon being hitched. You thought it was hitched to a star and you realize it's hitched to a hole.
Yeah. Another one is it breath by breath? Oh my gosh. Breath by breath. We're living our one less breath to breathe life. There's only so many breaths left. I just used up another one. That we're all melting like candles, disappearing as we talk. And what's amazing, it's been going on that way. It's always that way, but we're always dismayed by it when it applies to us. It's kind of strange in a way. And so the mystics are trying to deliver us from that, to be at home in the eternality. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And to live by that and abide in it and share it with others. Yeah.
We can, for 10,000 years, have live Turning to the Mystics with Teresa and John and have them all speak for themselves.
That's right. And wouldn't you say this too? I believe this, that when we read Brother Lawrence in a prayerful way, the deathless presence of Lawrence is talking to us, of the saints and mystics down through the ages, the wisdom of the ancestors, the mystical body. The eternal and the time are interwoven with each other.
And now we have a voicemail from one of our listeners.
Hello, Jim and Kirsten. My name is John. I'm from just outside of Philly, and I've been listening to this podcast since the very start. I've been a fan of Jim Finley for a long time, and also now for you as well, Kirsten. I hope to meet both of you someday. But this current season on Brother Lawrence is just fantastic. And I would like to ask the question, do you believe that there are actually many mystics out there like Brother Lawrence today? I tend to think that the most mature and wonderful people of faith will go unnoticed because they don't care about having good PR. They will just work in the kitchen and work in the shoe shop, just like Brother Lawrence. And I guess what I want to hear is a hopeful answer that yes, there's actually many mystics just like Brother Lawrence today. And it's a joy to even brush into them. So I guess I'm not sure if I know what I'm asking, but please just tell me. The world's got a lot of people like Brother Lawrence, yes?
I think, yes, I think there are many mystics, Brother Lawrence. For a long time, I traveled over 30 years leading silent retreats, and people would talk to me one-on-one and several times in Europe over the years. You can always tell when you're in the presence of someone who's been interiorly quickened by this. There's a kind of a undefinable quality of presence, transparency about them. So I think definitely, yes, because the path doesn't draw attention to itself. It just doesn't. But also, it touches the world in ways that we don't understand. There's a kind of an efficacy of this hidden fidelity to this way. But here's the thing. Some people are called to be mystic teachers. I shared this earlier that Thomas Merton once said that the monastic life is carefully crafted to cultivate this mystical oneness as destiny. He said, but there are people in the world who are being led into this state, and they have no one to help them understand what's happening to them. And that's when I started giving retreats. So I would say that anyone, to the extent that's sincerely moved by these talks, would be among all these mystics. It's like divine ordinariness and transparent simplicity, is the mystic. And so the mystic teacher, then I think who Brother Lawrence was, I think what they sense in them is, we've been so moved by your teachings, but you're not going to live forever. So would you write this out? In other words, if you would write this out so that when you're no longer physically with us, you can still be with us. And so who we tend to know are the teachers. But what the teachers know is what you see in them. The very fact you see it in them is completely true of you. That's why you can see it in them. And also the mystic, they also know it's just manifestation of their own fragile ordinariness. It's just the path that they've been asked to follow. So they do their best to follow it. So it's a good question. I think it's really true about the mystics in us. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Yes, wonderful to hear from you, John. We hope we meet you one day too. Thanks for the voicemail. And now we have another voicemail.
God bless you, James and Kirsten, all the way from Melbourne, Australia. You're the best. Anna.
That's it? Oh, we'll take it.
Well,
thank you.
We'd like to thank you so much, and we agree. we think it's true. We're amazed too. But we're amazed. It's a gift to share this with you. And here's the point: the sincerity in which you said that's amazing. See,
yeah,
that's the amazing dimension of you, and we're all sharing this dimension of ourselves with each other. So anyway, that was sweet. Anyway,
so sweet. I was born in Melbourne, Australia. Someone in my home state. That's so lovely. And now we have a voicemail from Rose.
I'm an 88-year-old woman religious, and I've experienced the unraveling Jim speaks of at several times during my life. It does not seem to get easier, even though I'm less likely to panic. Does Jim have any suggestions about how to deal with this constructively? I am still responsible for ministry, some ministries that are significant.
The details vary with each person as they age and move towards death. But there's always a very real sense that it doesn't get easier. It gets harder. Not always. Some people move toward death, but for some people, and so what we do, we take it as it comes. And if it's difficulty, we do our best to get the help that we need, inner, physical, emotional, medical, prayer, to help us to cope with it. But I think there's always this other side of it too. Is it as difficult as it is? One is that it's not just difficult. And it's not just difficult in the very sincerity which moves you to ask this question. And the two of those two get more and more mysteriously intertwined with each other. It's like the mystery of life and death, which is also the alchemy of the path itself. Often when I watched Maureen die here in the house and I watched her take her last breath, I'm so glad I saw it, watched it. And I thought that the death itself is not an event, it's a cessation. That is, you exhale and you don't inhale. It's not an event. And therefore, it's painless and boundaryless. The person's gone. But the illness aging process along which one comes to that liberation can be quite arduous. Mm-hmm. And so we can each hope that we'll be spared this way, and I hope I'm spared. But I'm consoled that however hard it might be, it unites me with those for whom it is also very difficult. I'm also consumed by the fact that even if it's extremely difficult, it's temporary because eternity is forever. But compared to eternity, but I relate.
Many of the mystics talk about their suffering as they're aging and coming towards death. So
that's really true. And that's why one of the talks was written by Brother when he was dying.
Yeah.
That last talk that we did is a very powerful talk. But also notice it's where he's the most luminous. at the same time, even though the pain is, so it's very mysterious.
Very mysterious. Yeah.
Interesting thing, St. Teresa of Avila, who had a difficult death, struggling life, and so on. She takes solace in the crucifixion and the suffering of Christ on the cross. And somehow we're participating in that. And Christ's suffering on the cross is God's participation in our suffering. And she finds solace and meaning in that, which glows with the light of resurrection.
And now a voicemail from Barbara.
Kristen and James, I just want to thank you and for what you're doing and for your conversation. And oh my gosh, what you said today when I was listening to the Brother Lawrence segment just touches me so deeply that I'm not alone. You know, I'm not alone in my experience of what I sense, you know, as holy, and without it being, you know, holier than thou. It's like holy. It's just what is. And I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate your conversations and your, you know, this journey, you know, that you invite us into by looking at these mystics and these writers. So thank you very, very, very much.
I think one of the most startling things, this book, Michael Sells, The Mystical Language of Unsaying. He said the mystic just doesn't say that everything is one, but the mystic says everything is one in a way in which the way they say it awakens within us the oneness of which they speak. And so it unexpectedly comes home as our own holiness. You know, that's the unexpected part. It like rolls over.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the fruit of the teaching, is that it's us.
And our last question for today comes from Megan. And thank you for writing in, Megan. She asks, could you share your thoughts on how the dimensions of the mind, heart, and body might work together in harmony within the practice of presence?
Let's say that when we speak of the head and the heart and the body, we're speaking of our experience of aspects of ourselves, and especially aspects of ourselves as it relates to our oneness with God or awareness of God's oneness with us. So at one level, the head could be referred to the insights that come to us, so that when we hear God loves us, by the power of the Spirit who dwells in our hearts, it's given to us to experientially know in a way we can't explain that God does love us. We could say that's the head. The heart, one can be seen as a seat of the emotions, which is the love center. Help me with this, like the longing. And the body is the embodiment of ourselves. The Word became flesh, we're incarnate spirits. But I think from the standpoint of the mystics, what they're saying is that I'll put it in Buddhist terms, and I'll say, in the way of a pilgrim, the head to know, the heart to love, the hara, H-A-R-A, to understand. And the hara is the ground of the belly. We understand in the groundedness of ourselves. Notice also in the way of a pilgrim, the prayer of the heart. The heart is not, how can I find my way to the heart? It's not the place where I find my way to the center of affect. The heart is that place in me where God and myself become undistinguishable from each other. So that the head, the mind, and the heart are modalities that gravitate toward that unitive state. We're aspects of that unitive state, which transcends and includes each one of them.
What you're saying, Jim, it's almost like they can be, you can have senses of being enlightened in them separately, but the oneness with God transcends them as separate.
Yeah, well, let's put it this way. When we talk like this where people are listening, the head center would be like insights. Oh, that rings true to me. And the heart center could be, I'm moved by that. I find it very moving. And my body embodies the love that's uttering it into being. See, it's a somaticized, incarnate sense of the presence of myself, none distinct from the presence of God, embodied in the gift of my body.
Beautiful. Wow. Well, we've come to the end of the deep and profound questions that are impossible to answer. but I thought you did a wonderful job of responding, Jim. So thank you so much for all the effort that goes into these sessions of reading and preparing to respond to the questions.
Yeah. And thank you for kind of guiding this in that direction. Like sometimes we've talked about this before, you and I. We can't answer them. There's no answer, but there's a response. And the response it respectfully mirrors itself back to the question. We're all in this together, which is contemplative community. Yeah.
And so this is the end of the season on Brother Lawrence. It's just been absolutely wonderful. What a treat. And thank you, Jim.
You're welcome. Yeah.
And it was lovely to have Carmen as a guest.
It was wonderful.
Yeah. We wish everyone well in the break. Look forward to being back for season 13.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Turning to the Mystics, a podcast created by the Center for Action and Contemplation. We'll see you again soon.
Do you feel called to walk a more contemplative path? The Center for Action and Contemplation is an educational nonprofit supporting the journey of inner transformation. Our programs and resources will help grow your consciousness, deepen your prayer practice, and strengthen your compassionate engagement with the world. Learn more about our resources, such as publications, podcasts, email series, and events at www.cac.org.